Still can't imagine that going down. I couldn't fathom a church service where I said, all right, guys, guess what? You really want to be a Christian? We're going to have some stuff in the back room. I need you to get a line. Yeah, I know, right? But for whatever reason, they did. And when Paul wrote to them, he left people that were growing. He left people that understood what he taught them, and he taught them a lot. He didn't just leave them with hey, choose Jesus, that's it. He taught them about end times. He taught about the Christ was coming back. He taught them about salvation and proper ways they should act and that kind of stuff. He was their pastor. He stayed there for a while. He didn't just pop in for a weekend, good job, guys, and leave. And so he grew this church. He had this church there. He taught the people. And the people, when he left, were self-sufficient and were growing. They were maturing in their faith. They were maturing as Christians. Right? They were learning to study things on their own. They didn't have the Bible like we had it, right? But they had what they learned in the Old Testament was brought to them. They had this idea, all the things that were taught by Paul. Imagine that. It was this new stuff that was crazy and exciting, and it spread like wildfire, right? That idea of a father and all these things. And so they had all that. And then people came in. Religious people came in. They're the ones that said the circumcision stuff. They're the ones that started teaching, you need more than that. You need other stuff. You know what? You need some rules to help hold you accountable. You need to follow this and do that. And what actually happened is those believers who were growing, they were heirs to the throne, they were growing and maturing, not backslid, but they unmatured. Is that what it's called? I don't even know what the word would be. I'm an Aggie, sorry. That's I don't even know that concept. They lost their maturity. They reverted back to their childhood, basically, because they had people there telling them, you need your hand held. You need to know these rules so you don't mess up. That freedom that he talked about, no, you don't understand. That's not enough. And so they kept adding to it. And yes, what happened is those early Christians slipped backwards in their maturity, and they didn't do things on their own anymore. They needed someone to help them and hold their hand. Did anyone in here think that that's what Christ wanted to happen? Does anyone think that the idea was that churches would be places for a pastor to hold everybody's hands and walk them very carefully through the Bible? Now, let me explain it to you. Okay, now Oma Kathy, again, she was there when it was written, so I don't have to explain it to her. But everybody else, I got to be like, Chris, I'm going to tell you about Jesus now, okay? That is not the point. The point was to share this message of hope, to share this idea that you can be set free, and it's Jesus only. There's no Jesus plus this, plus this, plus this, and you're supposed to take that and go with it. Like you're supposed to go, yep, I'm an heir to the throne, I'm gone. I'm going to tell people about this. I'm going to go out. I'm going to share this. I'm going to live this. Not, I'm just going to sit in a room and make sure everybody teaches me more things. I'm not ready for that yet. And I know some of you are kind of drifting right now and saying, I don't know what all this means. Here's what I want you to see. Look at verses 3 through 5. In the same way, we also, when we were children, we were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. You know what that means? You had to do what your parents told you to do. You had to do that, right? But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoptions as sons. There's a lot here. And I'm not going to get through all of it because this could make up several weeks talking about some of these things. But as I've been talking to you, I've been trying to lay the groundwork for what you see here. He talks about when you were, a child and you're under these laws and all those things were there. You had to do what you were told, all that kind of stuff. He's talking about all that to paint this picture of what you should look like as a Christian, because he's talking to the Galatians who are messing up, right? And so best that I can see, the best that I can explain this is he's saying, are you a son or are you a slave? Right? There's a difference between being a son of God and a slave to God. Now, some of you might think, well, I don't know, is that the same thing? I'm a slave to God. Isn't it cool to be a slave to God? Paul talks about that sometimes too. In this context, though, he's trying to differentiate to these people that there's one thing being a son, that's who you're called to be, and being a slave. I want you to think about this. If you think Christianity is about you doing enough good things, If you think Christianity is about you following the rules and that you have to do this and this and this, and if you don't do that, man, then that's a slave. You're a slave to sin. You're a slave to trying to be good enough. You're a slave to this false picture that it's not just Jesus, that you need other things to do. You understand? If you're a son, you're not seeking approval. You're not trying to do enough so the master looks at you and says, okay, good job. You're not tiptoeing around trying not just to make God mad. That's slave mentality in this context. You are an heir to the throne, a son who's not seeking approval because you already have approval. For God so loved the world, he gave his one and only son. Whoever believes in him shall not perish. You can't make God approve you anymore. He approves of you so much that he sent his son. He loves you so much. And so what Paul is trying to get them to understand, guys, you had it. When I left, you were living as sons, as heirs to the kingdom. You weren't trying to do these things so that God would somehow like you more or win his approval. You were acting out of approval. Because God approves of you, because you're an heir to the throne, you're doing things because you love him. Not because you're afraid if you don't do them, then God's going to get you. And so if you have this false idea that you're acting as a slave to God, then you have a false picture of God. To those people, and I met the people, I know there's people here that feel this way. That God is watching you. He's just waiting for you to screw up. You know, God's following behind you, Ryan, and just waiting for you to mess up announcements. And when you do, wham, he's going to get you. He's just waiting for you to sin. And as soon as you sin, he's going to put his thumb down on you. That's not God, though. That's not what he says. That's not what Jesus came to do. Even in the garden, people thought that was God in the Garden of Eden walking, ready to put it on them. He didn't even do that, did he, in the garden? He even called out and said, where are you? Like he couldn't see the two naked people hiding in the bushes. God all along, and I know the God of the Old Testament, we see some pretty harsh things in there. But the theme we see throughout there is the love he has, the grace that he shows is amazing. And so if you act as a slave and you have this slave mentality and not an heir mentality, instead of being a son, you're a slave, then you have this false picture of God and who he is. And maybe he's more like that dad that's rough and tough and you're trying to make sure you don't tick him off, right? Unfortunately for me, I've learned over these years, I don't know about you, I grew up in a time when that was life. Kids were to be seen and not heard. And that my goal was not to make my family angry, right? Like my job was not to make Grandpa mad at me. That was kind of a thing we all knew. Don't go in the house and upset Papa, right? Don't be running around playing and laughing like kid stuff. No, that has to go outside. He's trying to watch TV or the Cowboys or something like that. Even when my son was little, I remember we'd try to brief him before we went in to see him. My grandfather, all right, Papa doesn't like kids screaming. I need you not to do that. And we were kind of on edge the whole time when we'd go in with our kids, like watching them. Like if they start to get crazy, let me get them out of the house so Papa doesn't lose his stuff. Even when my grandfather got much older and some dementia and stuff had kicked in, he was a little more comatose and calm. It was crazy. He'd let kids scream. He didn't really care. He was sitting on the porch one day, and it was 4th of July. We were popping firecrackers. And even in that state where he was just kind of just there, right? My son lit up a firecracker and hit it by accident, and it fell and shot straight at my grandfather. Hit him in his belly. He had a big belly. And guess what? My new calm grandfather that I never grew up with shot off that porch screaming and yelling. I was like, oh, there he is. That's the grandpa I grew up with. That you better watch out. Luckily, it was short-lived. It was dark. He didn't know my son did it. He calmed back down and sat down and enjoyed the evening. But the silly thing I'm saying is that there was this idea that I was growing up and that people understood, and maybe you grew up in that time too, that I better be on my best behavior. I don't want to make my dad mad. I don't want to make my grandpa mad. I got to be a good enough boy for them so that they approve of me, right? Or honestly, just so they don't hurt me, right? My grandfather used to threaten to hang us up by a hook in the boathouse if we messed up. And listen, we believed it. There was no he's not going to do that. 100% we believed it, right? There was no doubt in my mind if I messed up, he was going to hang me up and leave me there. Not a doubt, not a hesitation. I could threaten that to my kids and they go, you're not going to do that. Yeah, I'm not. But we all thought they would. But that's not the picture. That's not what an heir is. That's not what God is. God's not just sitting there waiting for you to screw up and go, oh, you should have made me happy. That's not what he's doing. We are heirs to the throne. He loves us. See the difference between a slave and a son? See the difference between trying to win God's approval and acting out of approval? You don't have to do anything. I mean, I want you to work on your life because we're all sinners, so we need to work on our sinfulness and try to conquer the sin, the grip that it has on us, because that keeps us from getting closer to God. But that's not a measure if you're a Christian or not. A Christian is you accepted Christ. You did it all by yourself. You didn't have someone hold your hand to do it. It wasn't because someone else in your family was this or always went to church. You made that decision. And when you did that, you became an heir to the throne. You became a child of God. Look at verses 5 through 7 now. To redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoptions as son and become, because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts. Now, I do want to point out right there's a movement right now for people to harp on, don't ask Jesus into your heart. I don't know about you. When I grew up, that was kind of one of the things in churches. You need to ask Jesus into your heart, right? Well, guess what? It's biblical. Here it is right here. There's a lot of people in modern church worlds that are saying that that's not enough. That's not what it's supposed to be. That quit. I mean, I know people have their whole sermon series titled "Quit Asking Jesus into Your Heart" because they say, and they're not wrong. What they're trying to do is get people to say it's not just that though. You have to submit to him, surrender to him, and all that. But semantics. Here it actually says do that. Anyways, that's a side point for you. You'll see them out there if you try to find them. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. So here again is Paul trying to get them to understand, you are not a slave. You are a son. Now, I don't know if you remember back in chapter 3, in verse 28, it's not going to be up there. We saw Paul say this. There's neither Jew nor Greek. There's neither slave nor free. There's no male or female. So, son, that's for all of us, male or female. All of us are heirs to the throne. All of us are sons or daughters or whatever else, right? But notice he says, Abba, Father. Any of you ever been taught about Abba, Father? Yeah? Anyone tell me right off the bat what you think it means? Daddy. Yeah, Daddy, Father. But in a loving way, not, let me get on my knees before you, Lord Supreme Pontiff. No, Daddy. Let me yell at you. Any of you ever, when your kids were little, they said mom or dad 1,000 times a minute? Mom, 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 dad, 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 dad. That's the picture here. Jesus is said, Abba, Father. Daddy! Matter of fact, Paul writes it here, but I want to bring you back to where he said it. Look in, where is it at? Hold on. Luke chapter 23. Luke 23, Jesus is on the cross. Famous series we did was about words from the cross, things Jesus said from the cross. Remember, that's where we got tetelestai. That's what it means when he said it's finished. So in Luke chapter 23, verse 46, then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father. That Father there is Abba, Father. That Father there is Daddy. It's this relationship with him that's not, prim and proper, and I need to, be well behaved. It's my daddy. I'm yelling out to my daddy, Daddy, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last breath. Jesus cried out to his daddy. Again, you may not have had a positive experience of dads in your life. I don't know. Like, I got a great stepdad now, but I didn't have one growing up. And so here he is showing them what Jesus did and what we're allowed to do. Abba, Father. Because of this, you're no longer a slave, but a son. Jesus did that so we could be sons and daughters. He cries out to your Father. And what I want you to understand, Jesus does this. Father, I trust you. In the worst day of my life, Daddy, I know you're here. And the most pain I've ever experienced in my life, I know you're here. Daddy, I'm here. I know you're here for me. I trust you. I surrender to you. This is going to be okay because you're in control. Isn't that what Jesus did on the cross? And all that pain and all that suffering, he cried out and said, Daddy, I give you my life. As sons and daughters, as heirs to the throne, that's what we're called to do. Salvation is surrendering and saying, Dad, I trust you. Dad, I trust you with everything. That's when you could be at your lowest low. You could be the most painful experience of your life. And in that moment go, Father, Daddy, I don't understand. I'm hurting. But I'm going to trust you. I'm going to lean into you right now. And it hurts. And it still hurts, Daddy, but I'm going to trust you right now. Paul was reminding them that's what it means to be a Christian, is that you are an heir to the throne. You need to stop adding to the gospel. Stop adding to this. You are a son and a daughter of the Most High, and he is there for you in the midst of whatever you're going through. I don't care how much you don't know. I don't care how lost you might think you are. I don't care how bad you think you are. I don't know where any of you are right now. You know that? When you meet somebody, we don't know. Just as I can't tell if you're a Christian or not, I also don't know what's going on in your life. The vast majority of you in here know me, and you can see that I'm maybe a little less excited today than I normally am. And you know why. But there's a handful of you in here that don't know why. I'm not going to tell you why. And I don't know what's happening in your lives. I don't know what you're struggling with at your house. I don't know what's going on between you and your wife, or you and your kids, or you and your boss. I don't know if you think life isn't worth living right now. I don't know if you're so bogged down with fear and hate, you don't know what the next move will be. I don't know, and you don't know. But here's what I know. Your daddy's there. And his arms are wide. He doesn't want you to try to be good enough or do some extra. He says, just surrender, accept me, and trust me. Anybody in here have trust issues? I've had some trust issues. I've had chairs that I didn't trust, right? that have fallen and break on me. I have trust issues with the Dallas Cowboys. They just look good, man, and then, and I'm an Aggie, so also, they look good and they're horrible, right? I have trust issues. Anybody ever been lied to? Anybody ever had a knife in your back? Gossip spread about you? Anybody just you thought would never say that, but they did say that to you? Yeah. We all have. We've all been so hurt. And God is there ready. People will preach and tell you that he's there for you, and he's there for you in the middle of all that pain. And the problem is, he's there for you, but it doesn't necessarily go away. Right? The pain's still there. The situation you're in is still there. The addiction's still there. The relationship that is broken is still broken. But he's there for you. He's your dad. You can cry out to him. That's where trusting in him comes or needs to happen. When I cried out to my daddy, when it hurts, when I'm crying, when I'm upset, when my heart, my soul is in pain, it doesn't mean that the pain just goes away. And I think a lot of us have experienced that and went, big deal, didn't work. That's not